federal government lost in federal court because they were blanket denying religious exemptions. Man, you know it's gonna be hot when I got a disclaimer before the video. On January 10th, almost 2 weeks ago, the Secretary of Defense put out a memo stating that DoD personnel no longer were mandated to get the COVID-19 vaccine. Now, in this memo, the Secretary of Defense stated that military personnel were doing an outstanding job, that because of their leadership, we were able to protect not only ourselves, but the American people. And in that memo, there is a specific paragraph that I would like to talk with you about today because I have questions. Let's get in the nitty-gritty of this, shall we? The first paragraph on the second page of this memo, and there's only 2 pages, reads, "Religious liberty is a foundational principle of enduring importance in America enshrined in our Constitution and other sources of federal law. Service members have the right to observe the tenets of their religion or to observe no religion at all, as provided in applicable federal law and departmental policy. Components shall continue to apply the uniform standards set forth in DoD Instruction 1300.17, Religious Liberty in the Military Services." Now you're saying, what does that even mean? What's the importance of putting that in a memo? I'll read the first line again. Religious liberty is a foundational principle of enduring importance in America. Interesting. Wow. You see, that paragraph, in a nutshell, and some lines before it and afterward, talk about how that this whole mandate was in line with the Constitution, and although it was a mandate, didn't violate anybody's religious rights in any way.
Nothing to see here.
This paragraph feels like a CYA. It feels like when somebody goes out of their way to say, but I didn't do anything wrong here, so don't ask or say anything about the thing that I didn't do wrong. Don't look into it. I'm fine. Why is everybody looking at me? I didn't do anything wrong. And before I get a whole bunch of nut jobs that are going to start screaming at me and saying, you know, this is one thing or the other, or I don't know, the New World Order bullshit, all I'm going to focus on today is the way that military service members were treated, specifically in regards to religious exemptions that they requested while the vaccine mandate was in effect and prior to the vaccine mandate being enforced in 2021 through 2022 up until, well, just the 10th of January 2023. What about way before 2020? Before anybody even heard of COVID, right? Everybody keeps saying vaccines were a part of medical readiness from the get-go, way before the mandate took place, way before we heard of COVID. So obviously there's no issue there. Well, having served before 2020 and also been a drill sergeant before that time, I can tell you that if you didn't want to get a flu shot, or any shot for that matter, you could refuse it. Nobody really raised any eyebrows at it. If you didn't want the flu shot because you felt like you'd get sick all the time after it, I'm not sure if that's a real thing or the placebo effect, you could just say that you were allergic to eggs and they wouldn't give you the shot. It was one of the questions they asked you before they gave you the shot. Are you allergic to eggs or any other autoimmune diseases or man? You go, yeah, I am. They'd be like, you have any proof of that? I'm like, no, not on me. They're like, okay, cool. And they just say that you got it and you moved on and nobody gave a shit. And in basic training, well, shit, I'll let one dumbass speak for herself.
I told them that it was against my religion to get shots. Is it? Maybe. But I know I didn't have to get those shots.
And if you don't know who this dope is, she decided to get herself kicked out of the military because she didn't want to do it anymore, and then made a video on how to get kicked out of the military without getting a dishonorable discharge. And one of the things she brags about that you just saw is that if she didn't want to get a shot in basic training, all she had to say to the medical personnel was that it was against her religion. No paperwork, no having to talk to a chaplain, no getting an okay from a higher up military member. All she had to do was say, nope, that goes against my religious practices, and nobody gave two shits and just let her go in. Well, that is different than all the things that have been said to the public in memos and on the news about the United States military. It's almost like things were different with COVID, not just because of the disease, but also in the way that service members were treated. Let's talk about that. One of the things you're going to see pop up again and again is DoD Instruction 1300.17. It was in the memo written by the Secretary of Defense, and it's going to be in a couple other court documents that I'm going to bring up here today. It's basically stating, in a nutshell, and I'm dumbing this down, so don't yell at me, if any military member, Department of the Defense, has a religious objection to something, it is the job of the Department of Defense to treat each person and objection individually, keyword, individually, and then come up with a compromise that will not affect the overall wellness, etc., of the force in a negative way and still allow the individual to practice their religion. Religious objection from an individual investigation, come up with a solution that won't affect the rest of the department in a negative light and still allows the individual their religious freedoms. Right? Okay, we've got that. Good. Let's talk about Navy Commander Robert Greene Jr. Now, Navy Commander Robert Greene Jr. was in charge of Maritime Expeditionary Security Squadron 8. That's a mouthful. And he was removed as an executive officer from that squadron because he refused to get the vaccination. Now, his removal is significant because it happened a short time after a large group of U.S. Navy SEALs sued and won their suit against the President of the United States, President Joe Biden, stating that their religious freedoms were being violated because the entire Navy was blanket denying every religious exemption. Well, that doesn't sound like respecting people's religious freedoms in that paragraph that the Secretary of Defense put out. Oh, wait, I forgot. An airman had to sue the federal government in order to get their religious exemptions looked at and not blanket denied. Well, that's odd. Two entire branches had to sue the federal government in order to get their religious exemptions looked at. Wait a second, I thought that DoD Instruction 1300.17 said that each religious exemption had to be looked at individually. It was in the paragraph that I read from the Secretary of Defense. Is that not being done? Are we just ignoring the religious rights and freedoms of our service members? Well, that's not good. Now, you see, those are like three weird stories. Like, you couldn't possibly have any more weird stories where, service members were treated unfairly because they weren't vaccinated. Oh, so get this. You're a lieutenant that has done his 12-month tour in Korea, but now the vaccine mandate has come down and said, listen, you can't permanently move your duty station if you're unvaccinated. Meaning if you're in Fort Benning, you can't move to Fort Jackson. Or if you're in South Korea, you can't move to your next permanent duty station in Texas with your wife and 2 kids. So for 8 additional months, this lieutenant was stuck in Korea and couldn't move back permanently to Texas. Couldn't have his orders cut to go to a unit in Texas. But he could vacation and visit his family using up his vacation days in Texas. What sense does that make? The poor guy had his wife buy and move into a new home all by herself with her 2 kids because he couldn't go over and assist her. Wow, a lot of undue stress on the family there that I thought the Army was supposed to be taking, special attention and taking care of. Oh, you're a part of the Army, you're a big family now. I want to take care of mothers and wives and their kids and not make undue stress on them. But we're going to keep your husband here and not let him move back home. Oh, he can busy as much as he wants, but he can't move there. Can't move there. And I mean, it's not like there was a guy that did 8 tours with the 75th Ranger Regiment, 5 to Afghanistan and 3 to Syria. Let's ignore all those deployments, because now this guy's trying to put himself through medical school and become an officer in the Army. Wow, that's very advantageous for the military. This guy was enlisted, now he's getting an education through it and becoming an officer in the medical field. We should probably help him out, but you can't because he's unvaccinated. And since he's unvaccinated, he can't graduate. The government won't allow him to get his degree. It says, no, we're not giving out degrees. if you're unvaccinated. And now the school's holding his degree, so you've got a guy in limbo who's completed all the training but won't get the certificate because he's unvaccinated. We're not giving him his commission or his degree because he's unvaccinated, but he's unvaccinated because of his religious beliefs. But we're giving everybody the appropriate due care in their religious beliefs, but we're still punishing him because he's unvaccinated, which are part of his religious beliefs. All these numbers, all these articles of saying these thousands of people that are putting in for religious exemption, and then all getting blanket denied, and these individuals being treated pretty oddly based on their religious exemption. You won't even say going out of your way to hassle these nice kids. Wow, it just seems like something's a little fucked up. Like there's like an intentional blockade preventing these people from exercising their religious rights. Wait a second, what's this? Well, this is a memo from the Inspector General of the Department of Defense to the Secretary of Defense. Well, what's it about? The denials of religious accommodation requests regarding coronavirus disease 2019 vaccination exemptions. And its purpose is to inform you, the Secretary of Defense, of potential non-compliance with standards for reviewing and documenting the denial of religious accommodation requests of service members identified through complaints submitted to my office. Oh, geez, that means people's religious rights are potentially being violated. Well, it's just potentially, right? What did the DOD IG find? We found a trend of generalized assessments rather than the individualized assessment that is required by federal law and DOD and military service policies. Oh no! Oh no! Like DOD Instruction 1300.17? Oh! Foreshadowing. There's going to be a lot of links, and feel free to check them out. And they're going to have some of these denial letters in them. And by golly, if they don't look so cut and paste, as if no individual attention was given to the service member or their religious objection. Now, some of you might say, AC, there's thousands of these objections. There's bound to be some similarities here and there. But wow, you know what? You're right. You're right. Oh, man. But Commander Green. Well, you know what? I brought him up in the beginning, and all I said was he had a religious objection, and that he got removed from command. Like, that didn't seem that bad. What? Did something else happen with Commander Green that would lead me to think that there might have been some sort of assembly line to automatically deny service members their religious accommodations to their religious objections? Oh, shit! Buckle up, baby! The U.S. Navy's here to tell you that religion don't mean dick! Woo! I don't know how arrogant of a command you have to be to put out a step-by-step process to automatically deny individuals their religious freedoms. But Commander Green, after seeing a step-by-step process, specifically a 50-step process to automatically deny individuals their religious beliefs. But what did Commander Green do? Well, he was able to give evidence to the suit of the U.S. Navy SEALs versus President Joe Biden that confirmed that there was an SOP, a standard operating procedure, for processing religious accommodations. And that SOP was drafted by the Navy's Manpower, Personnel, Training, and Education Office. Once again, I'm going to generalize this 50-step process for you, but 1 through 10 was a whole bunch of I having to do things and fill them out so that I can send it up to the next level. And step 15, like 15 to 20, was the paper pusher. Right, the guy that sits in front of his desk and makes sure that your file has got all the right stuff in it. And part of that step that he goes through and looks at was to cut and paste your name, your date of birth, your religion and objection into a religious request denial form. Follow me here. You fill out your entire packet and you turn it in to your unit paper pusher. And your unit paper pusher picks up your packet before anybody else above you in your chain of command sees it and fills out a denial form for your religious exemption. All it needs is your commander's signature on it, and it's processed. Before your commander sees it, before your commander's commander sees it, before a chaplain sees it, it's already got a filled out denial form in it, just waiting on a signature. Wow. So here we are. We have this chain, this assembly line in the Navy to automatically deny service members their religious exemptions. We have members of the Navy and the Air Force having to sue the federal government because no religious exemptions are getting through, are being passed, are being approved, so they have to sue. And then they win. Both of them won. The federal government lost in federal court because they were blanket denying religious exemptions. Now, let's say that everything is totally fine, that there never was a COVID-19 vaccine or COVID-19, and this was just a bunch of service members requesting religious exemptions for a multitude of different reasons. Not honoring the First Amendment and blanket denying literally thousands of religious exemptions seems like a huge First Amendment rights violation. I can't say it is because I'm not that guy. And we already know that the recruiting is down and everybody was upset and 2020 suicides went up. Do you know how many people died of COVID-19 in the United States military? 96. 96 people died of COVID in the United States military since the whole pandemic began. Do you know how many people committed suicide? How many service members committed suicide in 2020? It was 580. We had 6 times more deaths from suicide in 1 year than we did during the entire pandemic of people passing away from COVID. Put that in a more grand scale, there were 453,456 cases of COVID over the past several years in the DoD. And with 96 deaths, that makes it a percentage of 0.00021171. That's your chances of dying. And yet, we're willing to kick out thousands of service members for a vaccine that happened after the pandemic that even right now has some variability as to how effective it was. There were 2,869 injuries from the COVID vaccine. Now I know people are going to say anecdotal evidence, and a friend of mine who I worked with in a recruiting unit was forced to get a vaccine. She got the Pfizer vaccine, and unfortunately it negatively affected her and it shut down her vagus nerve, which, dumbed down version of it, affects your digestion, affects your stomach. It tells you when you're hungry and other important things like that. She went from a totally fine, physically fit female soldier into being as skinny as a rail. She weighed under 100 pounds. She had to drink shakes because she couldn't keep solid food down just so she could maintain her weight. Unfortunately, she was medically discharged because of this unnecessary injury. Now, she's not taking this while sitting down. She's fighting back the best that she can. She's filed a report in the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System so that her reaction can be documented to hopefully prevent this from happening to others in the future. But was this entire event necessary? Now, luckily, she's gained a little bit of some of that weight back, but unfortunately, this is going to affect her every single day for the rest of her life. So now that we no longer have a mandate, here's my personal thoughts on the mandate. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, sailors, airmen, marine, all military personnel's rights away. It obviously violated the religious rights because why would you have such an obvious assembly line in order to automatically deny people? And I haven't even gotten to the armies yet. The memo talking about the vaccine and making it mandatory came out a year after Afghanistan. So a whole year after having military members feel lost, feel useless, feel as though what they did didn't matter, the United States government decided to tell them that if you don't do this one thing, we're going to kick you right out. Thanks for your service in one hand and a boot in the ass on the way out. What were service members feeling? Did anybody even think about that? 1 year after the fall of Afghanistan, where troops are hurt, torn, and confused, you gave them an ultimatum, an expiration date on their integrity. Regardless of how you feel, you'll either get this or you're gone. Thanks for your service. Now get the fuck out. You took people who had multiple tours overseas, lost friends, probably ended up wounded themselves, or walked back home with the invisible wounds, and then gave them dishonorable discharges. So much for your benefits, Staff Sergeant. See you never. The memo says that the DoD followed the rules and respected religious rights and freedoms. But these examples say otherwise. But here's a bombshell that I saved just for this moment. I don't know what to call this, a platform, a video, social media influencer, but it allows me to have people in positions of power all over the place send me information so that I can then better inform you about what's going on in the military. DoD, government, some of those people were directly involved in the religious exemptions. One such person works at the National Guard Bureau, the head of the National Guard near DC. Because what they told me was that all the Army religious exemptions sitting on the desks in the National Guard Bureau were also going to be disapproved. Let me tell you that story real quick. I filed for a religious exemption for the COVID-19 vaccination. I'm unvaccinated. I've gotten just about everything else from the United States government, but I felt uncomfortable taking the vaccine because I didn't think it had enough time in the trial phases to see if there was any negative repercussions. Already had COVID. I'm a healthy 30-something-year-old guy. I'll opt out. Here's my religious exemption. I had to fill that out in December of 2021, get counseled by a chaplain, and had that packet moved up to the National Guard Bureau in February of 2022. It is now January of 2022, the vaccine mandate no longer in effect, and I have yet to receive any information, so has every other National Guard member, about their religious exemptions. Thousands of us had a deadline to meet, met it, turned in the appropriate paperwork to people high above me who have no idea who we are or how we practice our religions. But there was no deadline for them to get back with either our approval or disapproval, rejection of our religious exemptions. Boy, I'd love to see a congressional investigation into why did it take so long to sign off on a religious exemption? And why are people saying, specifically to me, that are a part of that process or around it, that these religious exemptions were going to be blanket denied, just like the two other branches? Now, that's a question you might want to ask your senator or congressman, especially if you're in the Guard or one of those individuals that filled out a religious exemption and never received an answer. I'm sure Governor Ron DeSantis, who's got a whole bunch of guardsmen in his state who probably put up religious exemptions for the vaccine, would love to know why so many of his troops didn't get an answer. Let him know. Send out the feelers. He was a Navy JAG officer. I'm sure he might have some questions and answers as to the process of all of this. Did you know that there's a head chaplain for the National Guard? Works at National Guard Bureau too. Yeah, it's a full board colonel actually. In fact, Military Times conducted an interview with the head chaplain of the National Guard and his deputy director. Well, the interview happened on December 17th, 2021, when everybody had to have the religious exemptions, and they talk about, wow, what an overwhelming response from all these military members requesting a religious exemption. Man, that's a lot. Wow, we're worked to the bone here. I guess my question would be, did they know about all these stagnant religious exemptions just sitting on the desk at National Guard Bureau? Did they not know? Why wouldn't they know? He's the head chaplain of the National Guard. Was that not something that he wanted to know? I mean, I haven't seen another interview regarding this and the chaplain for the entire National Guard who you think would have some sort of influence over the overall viewing of this religious exemption. Hoo-ha! I guess the biggest question of all is, why am I getting people telling me that all of those religious exemptions were going to be denied? Got a pretty good feeling it was because they were. A small consolation in this entire event is for those of you that were kicked out and have negative DD-214s, because that can be rectified, and it states it in the memo from the SecDef, which I'll read to you right now. For service members administratively discharged for the sole basis that the service member failed to obey a lawful order to receive a vaccine for COVID-19, the department is precluded by law from awarding any characterization less than a general, under honorable conditions, discharge. Former service members may petition their military departments, discharge review boards, and boards for correction of military naval records to individually request a correction of their personal records, including records regarding the characterization of their discharge. I know it says contact a military review board. I don't know how the hell to do that, but if you received a negative discharge, anything other than general, under honorable conditions, anything less than that, just because of the COVID vaccine refusal, you can get that changed. You need to contact your senator or congressman, your local representative, so you can get your DD-214 changed. And that's a sad note to end on. I'll see you next time, weirdos. In the NCO Creed, the second paragraph starts off with, competence is my watchword. My two basic responsibilities remain uppermost in my mind: the accomplishment of my mission and the welfare of my soldiers. Where was the competence in kicking out so many for a mandate that lasted a year and some change? How did we accomplish our mission when our recruiting numbers were so low and we're losing experienced NCOs? How can I look out for the welfare of my soldiers? It says something when the oath of the commissioned officer is barely 4 sentences and the NCO Creed is 3 paragraphs. Water under the bridge? I don't know how the officer corps is going to recover from this.